The Skillet Pot, the Journal of the Irish Studies Workshop, audiobook. The purpose of this journal is to unite the Irish community. Ireland is one of the most distinctive cultures in the world. We are united by history, music, art, dance, literature, song and folklore. It is this shared affinity that brings us together, no matter how far we may travel from home. The Irish Studies Workshop is a safe and inclusive space for Irish self-expression across all genres. For the purposes of this quarterly journal, we invite contributions from anyone who has an interest in writing about any aspect of Irish culture. So if you have a story to tell, a travel adventure to relay, a poem or a song that you have written, please do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. If you have an interest in any aspect of Irish culture that you are currently pursuing, please do contact us and we will make every effort to publish your work. I do hope you enjoy the journal. Please let us know what you think of this first issue and what would be of interest to you in future editions. Thank you. The History and Archaeology of Achill Island by Thomas Maye-Banbury.
My family has been visiting the wonders of Achill Island for as long as I can remember. For us, there are few greater joys than the exhilarating drive through County Mayo and to be greeted by Achill's splendour, by its mountains and history. Achill's beauty has always tempted us back year after year and will continue to do so for a very long time. However, for me, Achill's greatest captivation lies through its mountains and history, which have always triggered my excitement and enthusiasm. The sight of the commanding majesty of Mount Slievemore's conical thrust as it fronts the more brooding Mount Crowcorn, which looks down upon the magnificence of Keene Beach, is a prime representation of Achill's magnificence. I really hope that future generations will share in the joy of discovering Achill's wonder, and that the quiet, everyday life of the island, away from the madness of the modern world, will continue as it has in the past, and will be allowed to preserve its magic for many years to come. I first became aware of the archaeological heritage of Achill and the hardships of the past everyday life on the island during the summer of 2015. This interest took us first to the summit of Mount Crowcorn, reaching 2,200 feet, and the chilling remains of a 1950s Avro Lancaster weather aircraft, which had tragically crashed upon the mountain and had remained practically unscathed for more than half a century. Having spent 2 eventful days in search of the Avro Lancaster on the foreboding mountain, which included being caught in one of the island's wild Atlantic storms, we finally stumbled across the mysterious sight of its engines, still lying face up, locked into the face of the mountainside. The sight that met us was like nothing we had ever seen before. The stillness of the air and mist as we entered the site's hollow location cast a sense of mystery which continues to fascinate me to this day. I can only imagine the impact of this tragic event must have had upon the local population of the island. Very recently, Angela Dawson, the daughter of Martin Gill Martin, who was a veteran of World War II, as a rear gunner and who died in the crash, planned a pilgrimage to Ulster in honour of her father's passing on the 17th of June 1950. Angela said, "In those days, women didn't go to funerals, and my mother didn't talk much about the tragedy when I was growing up. I assumed that there was no grave to visit until in May this year I started researching my dad's roots with my older sister June. Today, the crash site is marked by a large boulder painted white and can easily be spotted by the locals in Dua village. The events of June 1950 are still etched into the memory of the island, and I recall talking to Michael Gilty, the owner of the Last Drop pub, literally the last pub on the continent, of how he and others from the village climbed the mountain the day after the crash to bring down the bodies of the crew." When I first attended the Achill Island Archaeology Field School, I was only 14 years old. I was very grateful to be allowed to attend, as I was one of the youngest ever to be part of it. It was a great experience for me to have granted the opportunity to work with Achill archaeological field students, which gave me the chance to understand the 18th century history of Achill and the everyday life of those that scratched out a living in those harsh conditions in a professional manner. The expertise of Dr. Teresa MacDonald, who founded the school, her guidance and leadership allowed many students from across the world to research the historical sites of Achill, Achilbeg and Curran Peninsula. On the day of the dig, we were taken in a van around the mountain of Crowcorn and through to the entrance of Keene Beach, which we began to unearth an undiscovered village right on the base of the mountain, something which had lain undiscovered for more than 150 years. It is likely that the occupants of the village were likely greatly affected by the famine on the 1840s, when so many people left Ireland and Scotland to settle in America. It must have heavily impacted upon everyday life on the island. It was all thanks to the field school and the contributions of the island's locals that we were able to understand this history and extend our knowledge of this past. I must also acknowledge the generosity and skills of the field school students, many of whom had travelled from Canada and the United States to work on such a fascinating project and enable me to feel right at home with the archaeologists. It was all thanks to the Achill Archaeological Field School and its students that I was able to really awaken my historical passions and contribute to the past of Achill Island. The Achill Archaeological Field School was founded in 1991 as a training school for students of archaeology as well as anthropology. The field school is situated close to the base of Mount Crowcorn at the Achill Archaeology Centre in Dua and the deserted village of Mount Sleeve Moor, which we will discuss very soon. Ever since its founding, the Achill Archaeological Field School has been engaged in the investigation of Achill's archaeological landscapes, from the remains of early Neolithic settlers to famine-era settlements. In 2020, the field school will be investigating Achill's Curran Point, situated at the base of Curran Hill. Curran Point is a sand and marsh-covered peninsula, best known for its rich historical remains, which includes an early medieval ring fort, an infant burial ground, not to mention the shells of another 18th century settlement. The Archaeological Field School not only investigates the wonders of the island's rich history, but also plays a key role in bringing our history back to life. At Curran Point, a stone fort or cather, most likely dating to as far back as the Iron Age, is also a prime site for the investigations of the Achill Archaeological Field School. However, according to the 1838 Ordnance Survey letters, erosion has affected the area significantly. Now all that remains today is a raised mound onto which the children's cemetery has been inserted. However, to the east of Curran Point, visible out of the sand, are the remains of sub-rectangular houses belonging to a settlement known as the Tuan, which may date back as to the medieval period. It is one of the few settlements in Achill that has a full Bale Place name. Surrounding the site is a 2-metre layer of wind-blown sand overlain by mature grassland, which may have originated from 5,000 years ago. However, the archaeology of Curran Point is definitely not Achill's solitary site of history. This is exemplified from the ancient remains of Mount Sleevemore's deserted village and megalithic tombs. The Deserted Village project commenced in 1991 during the inauguration of the Archaeological Field School. The site, which continues to be excavated by the field school to this day, consists of 84 houses and field walls out of the original 135, which once stood over 200 years ago. The site is also divided into 3 distinct groups, spread over an area of 2 kilometres, along with the 200-foot contour on the southern slopes of Slieve Moor, which represents the latest phase of settlement on the mountain. The deserted village at Slieve Moor provides a haunting reminder of times past on Achill Island. The lack of a proper legitimate name for the deserted village is simply part of its mystery. However, the bigger question remains as to why the settlement was deserted, and for archaeologists and researchers, there is no simple answer. It is believed that the village was occupied during several different stages in history, with some of the current buildings being constructed on top of previous dwellings. Through study of the field systems surrounding the deserted village, archaeological investigation, and historical research, it has been estimated that the settlement dates to at least the Anglo-Norman period, 12th century AD. The presence of a megalithic tomb situated close to the east side of the village indicates habitation in the area some 5,000 years ago. The most recent habitation of the deserted village came to an end in the early 20th century, when the local population used the cottages for bullying. As bullying houses, they were occupied throughout the summer months, when the cattle would be grazed on Slieve Moor's mountainside, but the residents would return to their homes in the village of Dua for the winter months. Intriguingly, Achill is thought to have been one of the last places in the whole of Europe to have practiced bullying, which is also known as transhumance. My parents' passion and interest in this stunning site eventually led to the Loch Danariga Crannog, situated on the road just half a mile from the main town of Kiel. It measures 18 metres in diameter and is located in the centre of a small lake. As we discovered, many archaeological areas on the island are not easily accessible. Achill's Crannog is no exception. Archaeological investigations carried out in the dry summer of 1984 unearthed a substantial palisade. This would suggest a much larger crannog that is currently visible. For the local people living at the time of the crannog's use, they would have had at their disposal a strong defence area from any attackers, which was common at that time on the island. Additionally, the island contains the remains of 5 forts, most notably Fort Dunkilmore, fort of the Big Church. Recent archaeological excavations have revealed an early medieval enclosure containing figure of 8 cells, altars and cross slabs, as well as a ring barrow incorporated into the embankment. Archaeologists of Ireland and Achill are indebted to the projects of the field school surrounding the deserted village and the island's rich historical sites. The contributions to Achill's history have significantly advanced our understanding about the local area. I hope that ongoing research will offer further insight into the history of such a wondrous place. The archaeological sites of Achill Island are still visible just under the top layer of grass and provide a fascinating flavour of how life was lived in those former times. We are only beginning to scratch the surface.
Thomas Moore, 1779 to 1852. Irish poet, singer, songwriter and entertainer. His association with Leicestershire by Tom Doherty.
Thomas Moore was born in Dublin, 1779. His father, John Moore, was a successful grocer, and his mother was Anastasia Moore, née Codd. Moore was a bright young man, and following the removal of the Catholic disabilities in 1794, Moore became one of the first Catholics admitted to Trinity College, Dublin, in 1795 at the age of 15. His religion made him ineligible for the scholarship he should have earned by virtue of his score on his examination. Fortunately, his father could afford the tuition. Among Moore's close friends while at Trinity were Robert Emmet and Edward Hudson. Both were members of the United Irishmen movement and involved in the 1798 uprising. However, Moore himself was not a member of the movement. Following the uprising, Hudson was imprisoned and exiled, and Emmet wounded but escaped to France the following year. Moore was called to testify in a Trinity investigation about his association with the rebels, but he answered only questions about himself and was allowed to remain at school. Emmet was hanged and beheaded 5 years later after the failure of the 1803 uprising, which he led, and his last words of the speech he gave after his sentencing on 19th September 1803 have passed into Irish legend and literature. When my country takes her place among the nations of the earth, then, and not till then, let my epitaph be written. In 1799, having earned his BA at Trinity, Moore left Ireland to study law at the Middle Temple in London. However, it was his poetic and literary skills that brought him notoriety. The composition and publication of the Irish Melodies, better known later as Moore's Melodies, transformed his reputation. Moore's Melodies included such wonderful songs as The Last Rose of Summer, The Meeting of Waters, The Minstrel Boy, and Oft in the Stilly Night. The publication met with such a great success that he was given a contract by his publishers of £500 per annum, a very large sum at the time, which left him financially comfortable. He had a major success as a society figure in London, meeting the Prince of Wales on several occasions, and gained his patronage for his poetry. He also enjoyed, in particular, the patronage of the Irish aristocrat Lord Moira, a soldier and politician. Moore was often invited to Lord Moira's country seat in Donington Hall in Leicestershire, where he enjoyed the extensive library. In 1811 he married Elizabeth Bessie Dyke, a young Irish actress. In 1812, from summer to May 1813, Moore and Bessie settled in a house in Kegworth village, near to Lord Moira Donington's Hall, called the Cedars, London Road, at a rent of 30 guineas a year. Their first child, Anastasia, was born there and baptised in the local parish church. Moore wrote several of his Moore's Melodies and worked on his novel La Rouge while at the Cedars. Despite the short stay in Kegworth, Moore left his mark on the village. The room where he worked in the Cedars is still known as Tom Moore's study, and the pine walk he liked to stroll along near Broad Hill was known as Tom Moore's Walk. Sadly, I could find nothing of the walk remaining today. Lloyd Moore's decision to move to India undoubtedly influenced Moore's move from Kegworth village. Afterwards, he lived for a time in Ashbourne, but later moved to Slopperton Cottage, Bromham, Wiltshire, where he found a new patron in Lord Lansdowne. Moore and Bessie had 5 children, 3 girls and 2 boys. All their children predeceased them. 2 of the girls died young, one in infancy and another aged 5. Anastasia died of consumption aged 17. Their second son, John, died at the age of 19, whilst in the cadetship of the East India Company. Thomas, their eldest son, a wild but gifted youth, joined the French Foreign Legion as an officer and eventually died in Algeria, aged 27. Thomas Moore lived out his life in Slopperton Cottage. He died on the 26th of February 1852 and is interred in a vault at St Nicholas Churchyard, Bromham, Wiltshire. Engraved on his tombstone are the words, Thomas Moore, the poet and patriot of Ireland. Found in translation, revealing new accounts of An Gorta Mór, the Great Hunger, by Angela Maye-Banbury and Mary Warrener.
They say time is a great healer. Equally, the passage of time can also make our memories more burnished, more fluid and pertinent to our everyday lives. Few events in Irish history evoke emotion more than the Irish famine. Almost 2 centuries have passed since the Irish famine, or An Gorta Mór, the Great Hunger, was at its peak in the bleak winter of 1847. So much has already been written about the Great Hunger that we may feel we already know all we need to know about that controversial and harrowing period of Irish history. During the famine years, an estimated 1 million people lost their lives through disease or starvation. A further 1 million emigrated from Ireland to Britain, the USA, Canada, Australia and further afield to join the growing Irish diaspora. Behind this figure of 2 million lives lost lie individual and deeply personal accounts of the actual events which took place during the famine era. Crucially, however, very few eyewitness accounts of An Gorta Mór were recorded at the time by those who suffered and who subsequently died or emigrated following the potato blight which engulfed Ireland. In 1840s Ireland, it was far from commonplace to document accounts of everyday life. This was primarily for 3 reasons. First of all, both journalism and recording actual experiences were in their infancy. Secondly, as the brutal realities of the Great Hunger's impact became increasingly apparent, the need to survive took precedence above all else. Thirdly, for many, the realities of starvation, frequently accompanied by eviction, defied description and, if even recorded, risked re-victimising the victims and their families of those on whom the impact of the famine was felt most profoundly. Consequently, there is a dearth of knowledge which provides first-hand accounts of the brutal realities of the famine and its subsequent impact on individual and collective memory. It is in this context in which this Founded Translation research project is located. But thanks to work undertaken by the Irish Folklore Commission, we do have access to valuable second and third-hand accounts of this transformational and disturbing period of Ireland's history. As part of events to commemorate the centenary of the famine, the Irish Folklore Commission resolved to capture the memories of the children, grandchildren, friends and neighbours of those who had borne witness to and or perished in 1840s Ireland. To this end, the Irish Folklore Commission documented hundreds of interviews across Ireland during the 1930s to preserve these stories of the famine years. The researchers, many of whom were teachers, invited respondents to comment on a number of specific themes, including how the blight first manifested, stories about burials and family evictions, stories of so-called superism and proselytism, and memories of the relief schemes and workhouses which were commonplace at the time. These stories were then documented in a range of ways. For the most part, accounts were either transcribed by the interviewee themselves or by the researcher, People interviewed each other, interviewing older relatives, friends and neighbours to capture their memories of the period. Some interviews were recorded using Eddyphone recorders. Tragically, as an economy-saving measure, the vast majority of these recorded interviews were deleted, leaving us with just a handful of original recordings to listen to today. We discovered that many of the original documented stories were written in Gaeilge, never having been made available to a wider audience. Myself and Mary Warner resolved to address this gap in existing scholarship by seeking to complete a faithful, verbatim translation of a selected number of these accounts. By making these previously undisclosed memories accessible to a wider audience, we have sought to ensure that these memories of the famine are not reconstructed to suit ideological goals or airbrushed out of history. In summer 2018, Mrs. Mary Warner from the Emerald Centre in Leicester began to work on the 3 Irish Folklore Commission translations of the famine. Her translation work began on the shortest of these accounts. The report was handwritten in 1945 by a schoolchild who was interviewing an elderly acquaintance. The Irish was written in old style with dots above several letters, flat-topped or gently rounded letters to take a chevu. The words were written with a scratchy pen that needed to be dipped in ink every few words. Interestingly, the shape of several letters is different to English. This form of written Irish had been taught to Mary both at home, by her father, and at her junior school. Mary also used a dictionary that had belonged to her West Cork grandfather. It was crucial that the translation work communicated the feelings in the narrative without copy editing or correcting grammar. Mary had used this approach to very good effect in translating a number of Irish songs and reports in the past. The first translation was the account of a woman aged 74 who lived in County Mayo. Her answer to the first question about the coming of the blight was brief. Her family had enough potatoes and shared those with those who had none. Her reply to the second question about stories and tradition was also succinct. She mentioned a famine house and named one person who had died of hunger. Her reply focused on the question 3 about migration and breakup of families. Her interview revealed that a townland had 17 houses before the famine, but only had 5 afterwards. The fourth question asked her to comment on evictions. The interviewee did not know about anyone who had been dispossessed, but some of the landlords lost out in spite of marking crops in the gardens or the little fields where crops grew for their rent. On a lighter note, she tells us of a deserted house without a chimney called a muchan, where poutine was made. The fifth question focused on the types of locally available foods, including foods for the soup kitchens. 5 miles from her home, she recalls a place where gruel was available and people walked to obtain it. There were children in care in the same place. The sixth question about relief schemes forced hard labour before receiving any food. Here the interviewee talked of a man who had walked 4 to 5 miles to work on one such scheme and was paid only with a pint of yellow meal every day for draining ditches and making roads. The other 2 translations also yielded some previously undisclosed insights about the famine years. Both interviewees were from Eris, and like the first interview, were handwritten. The text needed to be enlarged to decipher the words. One interviewee was a man aged 69 and the other aged 75. The more detailed of the 2 describes the progression of the blight over the 5 years and the increase in hunger as each year progressed. In these 2 cases, it was acknowledged that people living near the shore who had easy access to shellfish and edible seaweeds survived, although their appetites were never satiated. Both interviewees had a great deal of sympathy for people living 10 or more miles away from the shore who had to walk several miles whilst getting seriously hungry. To contrast with the daily hunger, they remembered accidental feasts because a beast had drowned or its meat had been fed to a townland. Such beasts had otherwise been used in lieu of rent. 2 extracts from the interviews are reproduced here in this audiobook. Interview 1, Irish Folklore Commission record number 20817, Sean O'Garrity, original interview and translation. The interview below was taken in the district of Dunochen, County Mayo, in the barony of Loris, Eris, in the months of May and June 1945, from the oral memories of Sean O'Garrity, aged between 73 and 75. His mode of life was a small-time farmer and fisherman. He was settled in the townland of Cathru, Nagloch. He was born and reared in Ballinacha. The name of the writer as Padraig O'Gahan from Cahuteg, Ballinacha. This is what Sean said in his interview, and I quote, "This is the way that understanding of the story was given to me always by my grandfather. A heavy fog came in from the sea in the middle of the summer, and next morning there was blackness on the leaves of the stalks, and a couple of days later the stalks themselves were decayed by the blackness or the knocking down." The translation of the three accounts was totally absorbing and humbling. It reminds us of the enduring importance of the famine today and the way accounts unite us both in memory and in a sense of place of Ireland. It is also a salutary reminder that we must never forget to remember. Discourses of hunger resonate still strongly today with the Irish community. For example, research undertaken by myself and Dr. Enoch Casey, formerly of Sheffield Hallam University, shows how discourses of hunger can unite past and present. The famine unites the Irish no matter where we are in the world. It is vital that we continue to translate these accounts. The similarities across the interviews recorded by the Irish Folklore Commission are too prevalent to be dismissed as mere folklore. Time may well be a great healer. At the same time, memories of the past remind us where we are from and where we want to be in the future. If anyone would like to do some translation work or contribute to our research with the Irish Folklore Commission, which is ongoing, then please do get in touch with me. We hope this article gives you a sense of the enduring importance of reporting the experiences of the famine to a global audience faithfully and sensitively.
St. Patrick's Day in the Morning. The iconography of 17th of March greetings cards by Nessun Danaher.
One of the nice things about retirement, assuming one has a pension or two to draw on, is the available disposable income. Becoming a collector of ephemera is a distinct possibility. Choices range from stamps, first day covers, postal history, postcards, trade cards, banknotes, or phone cards, medals and so on. Here we are going to look at collecting postcards relating in particular to items produced for making St. Patrick's Day. Irish-related postcards cover a wide range of topics, and this is reflected in St. Patrick's Day cards. The heyday of the postcards was from 1880 to 1920. It was possible at that time in the UK to post a card in the morning with delivery to a local address the same afternoon. At that time, postcards served as a telephone call. An email or a text would a century later. Postcards were cheap, attractive, informative and adaptable. A personal message could be rather anodyne, exciting and informative. The personal message often referred to attendance at a dance for the feast day. In this article we are looking at the face of the card, not so much the message on the back. Our sample is of 200 cards from the period highlighted earlier. Each was looked at for evidence of content, theme and presentation. The imagery of shamrocks and harps was ubiquitous and often presented a variety of inventive and attractive formats. All printing was in colour. Probably most of our samples originated in the USA, not surprising given the number of Irish immigrants in the USA and Canada at that period. Some cards even had tiny packets of shamrock seeds attached. The printed message was meant to promote mutual rejoicing and celebration of the Irish background or heritage of sender and recipient. Whilst there was a wide range in terms of iconography, very few cards were overtly religious in tone only about 6% showing St. Patrick himself. So perhaps it is fair to say that the messages intended were secular rather than directly religious. One set of linked motifs, usually appearing together, were threefold: a shillelagh, blackthorn stick, a clay pipe, and a type of top hat. These are very common on cards from the USA. They present the stereotype of the faction fighter, the formal dress of a male marching in procession. The clay pipe symbol was for shared recreation. The pipe was sometimes accompanied by green sashes, which would have been worn in processions of bodies such as the Ancient Order of Hibernians and other Irish immigrant organisations. Faction fighters normally represented localities in the New World. The shillelagh was often out of necessity for self-defence. Think of the violent scenarios in gangs of New York. Anti-Catholic hostility was strong in the USA and Canada. A second strand, reflected in a third of the cards, was a specific Irish geographical location. This was often stereotypically touristy, the Killarney area being a favourite, but quite a few featured other specific locations which had individual appeals to the sender or recipient. Exile and migration featured on 20% of the cards, especially in an American context. Leaving for the USA or writing home from it was rather more dramatic than in England-Ireland communication. The Irish language featured on 24% of the cards, but only in a marginal way, with tokenistic offerings such as Erin go Bragh, Alan Forever, and Céad Míle Fáilte, 100,000 welcomes. Only one card featured the Irish language strongly. The theme here was Buan Carada, continual friendship. There was a range of other iconic images: the pony and trap, the round tower, high crosses, famous castles, especially Blarney and Kissing the Blarney Stone, and an Irish dancer or musician, but these latter two are rare on St. Patrick's Day cards. Animal life occasionally featured: pigs, the staple of a simple Irish farm, cattle and donkeys with double-shaft carts or creels of turf. Cottage occasionally featured, sometimes with a lady at a spinning wheel. The historical archaeological images of castles, round towers and high crosses reflect 19th century Irish scholarship, the burgeoning Irish tourist industry, and the development of national pride and festival self-image. This was part of the growth of national identity reflected in Conradh na Gaeilge, the Gaelic League, and Sinn Féin, We Ourselves. Images of females included older as well as younger women, and a female sometimes represented Erin. One noted American postcard producer, Ellen H. Clapsaddle, produced attractive artwork, fine colouring, and carefully packaged stereotypes. Young people in particular were depicted with charming stereotypical Celtic visages, complete with neat little snub noses and prominent ears. Faces are smiling, happy and radiant. The medium was the message. Occasionally a luxury card was published. Some Irish cards were printed on processed peat. Others had textured features, such as the card included here, with individual felt shamrock leaves. One of the great cultural icons of 19th century Ireland and the Irish diaspora was Tom Moore, poet and songwriter, and author of the famed Moore's Melodies, 1859, and his work often appears on Irish postcards. The card sent for St. Patrick's Day, entitled Here's a Wish, is a beautifully decorated Celtic motif item in red and green from the famous Cluny Studio of Dublin. Cluny Studio at 39 Harcourt Street was established in 1923 by Mrs. Gertrude M. Grew, 1883 to 1976, from Portadown. She studied at Belfast School of Art and the Royal College of Art in London. She was joined in 1924 by Wexford-born Margaret O'Keeffe, a product of the Metropolitan School of Art in Dublin, who specialised in enamelling. At Cluny, they turned out jewellery, enamelled metalwork, stencilled fabric garments for children, soft toys, coloured embroidery, hand-coloured prints, calendars and postcards, and hand-painted woodwork. Gertrude won a prize medal for a pottery jar at the Tailteann exhibition in 1924. Both Gertrude and Margaret were founding members of the Irish Art Workers Guild, 1925. In the 1940s and 1950s, they worked from their studio in Dawson Street, Dublin. The card illustrated here is a fine example of their Celtic Revival printed work. So there's sometimes more than meets the eye when one takes a look at St Patrick's Day postcards of the 1890 to 1930 period. Perhaps these lines might help to explain the significance touched on earlier of the top hats, my old Scalara hat. I met the King of England a week ago today. He shook me warmly by the hand and asked me home to tea. "Our Pat," said he, "I'm glad to see you looking so fine and fat." And all the time he kept screwing at me old Scalara hat. Sure, 'twas worn by my father at the patterns and fairs, and all the boys and pretty girls were sure to be all there. It was built 100 years ago. It's the divil the worse for that. A regular lady dazzler is me old Scalara hat. My parents had this on Regal Zonophone, 78 RPM, sung by John Sheridan circa 1940. It was written apparently by Dublin baritone songwriter Leo Maguire, 1903 to 1985. Scalara could have come from the Irish scolar.
Downtown, a short story by Laurie Cusack.
Nobody cares. Everything's turned to shit, Helen Higgins shouts. She mopes through her flat as another episode takes hold of her. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Thumps come from next door. How dare you, she screams at her bedroom wall. Belt up, you old cow, a muffled voice yells back. She walks back into the living room and slumps down by the radio. A panel's discussing Trump on Radio 4. She's been riveted to Donald for days now. His screen image is resilient. He tells people what they want to hear, Norman. Undoubtedly, his message is populist. That's all there is to it. Their talk reminds Helen of her granddaughter. Oh, come on, Geoffrey, don't be simplistic. You can't be serious about how screen savvy he is. Helen was taking all this in, nodding her head and tutting. Yes, 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 Helen screams. Trump's ahead of the game. He's worked out how you can dumb things down even further. Helen's face is alert. Their talk is screwing further into her head. That's utter rubbish, Geoffrey. Before Facebook and Twitter, we were more human, weren't we? Helen says, joining in the radio conversation. Attention spans are in decline, Norman. People relate to screens far more readily than book or newspaper nowadays. Something's being sucked out of us, Helen shrieks at the radio. Are you suggesting screen time is subverting our humanity? Yes. Stupid oaf. Helen starts thinking about her granddaughter again. How distracted she'd become, her little thumbs in motion all day long. You're brainwashing her with those gadgets, she'd snap at her daughter. She's connected to everything, but she doesn't know what's happening around her. Her daughter would tell her she was talking rubbish. Mum, that's the way of the world now. Then there'd be a bitchy scene about fresh air, play and boundaries. You're taking your tablets, Mum, her daughter nagged. That was always match point. Helen would storm off after that. Why aren't we stopping all this? She screams at the wall. Helen's been slowly winding herself up for months. She feels desolate. She clocked her old combat jacket a few minutes ago, hanging in the far reaches of her wardrobe. She'd been rooting around for a blanket. Should have slung that damn thing out years ago. Clot heads, a lot of us. We didn't change anything, did we? It's unprecedented how all these mid-states and Rust Belt votes went his way. She stares at her magnolia wallpaper and tuts. She hasn't slept properly for a long time. Her appetite is zero. You could say he's the most dangerous man in the world now. Then something climactic clicks in Helen's head. Poppycock. She sits up straight and has a stretch. She walks over to get hold of her old combat jacket in the next room. She takes it off its hanger and puts it on. That's the first time I've worn it in 30 years, she whispers. It feels loose on her. She looks at herself in the full-length mirror. Old CND, green and common, troops out of Ireland badges remain pinned on its camouflage collar. Then Helen hears a ululating wailing she hasn't heard in years. It's the keening sound that the women use to make it green and common. It starts to fill her Clapham flat as she remembers the tears, wire, cold, and the mud of her time camped there. Should she be dwelling on her past like this? Guilt? Maybe she should start taking her tablets again. Listening to Donald Trump on this and Donald Trump on that for days on end had exploded something deep in her mind, like a fire door that's been blown off its hinges. The sheer stupidity of it all, Helen yells. The mirror. What made them do it? What made them do it? She looks at herself in her old combat jacket. Memories of her last march 30 years ago well up inside her. Skinhead fascists filled with hate, snarling commie scum and traitors. Thugs jostling with police corralled outside, the Crown and Thistle surging at her and her comrades as they chanted, "Troops out of Ireland, fascists off the street." A pipe band from Derry led the way down Lambeth Walk, through the Oval and Stockwell, into the centre of Brixton. That evening they all rallied in a frontline pub with the best jukebox in South London. 2 sevens clash, police and thieves pretty rakent, and breakfast in bed. The landlord, Derek, was a Jamaican. He was down to earth and decent. He'd feed you when you were hungry, let you run up a tab, cash your dole checks when you were desperate. That night changed Helen's life though. Derek cracked. A Socialist Workers' Party official was rounding the day up on the pub microphone. She was thanking this one, thanking that one. Then she started bad-mouthing the British and praising the struggle in Ireland. But the final straw for Derek was when she unfurled the Union Jack flag and set it ablaze to raucous cheers. "Pull the plug, you hear? The bloodbag man," he yelled, storming out from his bar, tears streaming down his cheeks as the British flag burned in front of his eyes. "No flag burning here. Disrespect. Get out of my place. Disrespect my father. That means you disrespect me. So you're done. You need to leave off now." They had to find another pub after that. And when Helen found out how Derek's father had died, she felt shame. He'd met his maker in the Second World War, fighting close quarters with Nazis in bombed-out rubble. Helen saw through it all when she was told that. The Afro-Caribbean's tears pointed another way for her. She forged a career on the stage, dropped her old comrades after the Derek incident. Her name was in lights for years until her mind peeled like an onion with the intensity of it. Maybe she took too much Pinter and Beckett on over her career, mind bomb after mind bomb, an endless interrogation of text. Maybe that's why, what chiseled her nerves, maybe. Helen needs all her theatrical skill now. She knows there's a gathering at the American Embassy today. Such things are predictable. A left-wing idiot is as dangerous as a right-wing idiot, she yells at the wall as she gathers what she needs. Helen's sure she's right. She's blinking well going to do it. No one else will. Damn the tablet, she yells. She feels good. Real good. She smiles as she makes her way to shave off every hair on her body. "I need to be meticulous about this," she says to herself. "I'm actually doing something. It takes her a long time, but she glows with certainty. It's early afternoon when she arrives. All the usual suspects are there. She half recognises a few old wrinkled up punks who are shouting abuse at the embassy. Images, images, images. She keeps saying to herself, "I'll give them images." She strokes the bottle of petrol inside her combat jacket and knows she's right. "I'm a concerned idiot. I demand a voice, she whispers over and over. Then Helen moves out onto the road and owns her space like the old lovey she once was. She pours the bottle over her head, the liquid soaks into her combat jacket. "Resist, resist, resist," she screams. The TV cameras across the street sniff blood. She sits down like a yogi. Then she flicks her lighter. Gadgets flash all around her. Helen's last thoughts are of her granddaughter's stubby thumbs, pressing, pressing, pressing.
Book Review: Earthrise by Gus Gresham.
Gus Gresham's Earthrise is a young adult crossover novel and is a cracking read. Indeed, it ticks all the boxes where page-turning is concerned. Gresham draws the reader in from the very first line regarding his feisty heroine. Erin would remember this as the night everything started getting messed up beyond all recognition. It's a coruscating testimony of our times, concerning the way vested interests manipulate power and our free will for unadulterated profit. Corporations don't care if their products make us sick or unwell, do they? Earthrise explores these micro and macro themes with relish. With dark humour, Gresham tackles quick profit and the preponderance of fast food outlets convincingly. He explores society's obsession with food and convenience in an elegant way. One such theme, featuring a TV advert, is striking as Erin and her family watch in stupefied fascination. "Assume the position," said the waiters. Beresford and Will leaned back, smiling faces tilted upwards. Each waiter took the top from a sesame seed bun, and the camera zoomed in on the halves containing the filling, a juicy steaming burger daubed with relish. "It looks like well-presented poo," said Erin. "Shush," said Dad. The camera zoomed out and, unbelievingly, the waiters pushed the open burgers into the faces of their respective charges. The only reactions from Beresford and Will were muffled groans of pleasure. "Eat, you pigs," cried the waiters as they massaged the burgers into their customers' faces. "Eat. Eat." Dad flopped about in his armchair with laughter. "I'm surprised at Will Forecastle," said Mum. "They won't really do that tomorrow," said Dad, though he seemed a bit unsure. "Not with real customers, it's just a gimmick." The clown-outfitted waiters cocked their legs up on the table to get better leverage and chanted, "Eat, eat, you know you want it." Said Beresford, managing briefly to angle her soiled face to the camera. "This is heaven." This pertinent tone of dark comedy recurs throughout the novel, and at choice moments, the text delivers its undenying message of society's unhealthy relationship with fast food. But Gresham also conveys that the actual joke is on us, the customers. We're being taken for a ride, the ride of our lives, literally. Conned with the burgeoning crisis of health conditions relating to poor diet and obesity, catastrophe looms large. Although this is only one of the themes in Earthrise, it is handled with clinical precision and stands as a stark dystopian warning. The crowds began to disperse, and she understood that they were workers, that it was a change of shift. She watched them shuffling in their grey rags and broken shoes, hands going to mouths, eating mechanically like cows chewing the cud. And as they trudged and masticated, the cubist clamshells of polystyrene takeaway boxes accumulated in the unspeakable filth underfoot. What also makes Gresham's scorching text stand out is the way it dramatises the courage and integrity of young adults, with Pullmanesque aplomb. After all, someone must take a stand, or we will all perish. These young adults have guts. Erin and her gang have something to say. Reading Earthrise reminded me of Guillermo del Toro's film Pan's Labyrinth, concerning the way reality and myth merge to make sense of the world during distressing periods. And young minds process such horror in mythological fashion to get a handle on what's going on. Gresham's text understands this, and it is both riveting and scary as it scrapes under the skin of corporate greed with surgical expertise. In one of Erin's visits to Chthonian, she explains a possible dystopian future where eco-Armageddon is a reality. There was a thunderclap. Then the ulcerated sky burst open and hot blood came down on everything. Gresham handles this tense mirroring of reality and fantasy with skillful craft and gusto throughout. The pace of the text is nuanced and balanced in all the right places. This dark, twisted fantasy is the real deal. Brilliant. Many thanks to everyone who contributed to this first issue of the Journal of the Irish Studies Workshop and to this audiobook. The second edition of the Skillet Pot will be available soon. The Irish Studies Workshop Editorial Board. Commissioning Editor Dr. Angela Maye-Banbury. Editor Stuart Maye-Banbury. Creative Arts Dr. Laurie Cusack. Social History Dr. Nessun Danaher. Archaeology, Ancient History Thomas Maye-Banbury. Irish Language Mary Warrener. Art Kendrick Snowden. The Irish Studies Workshop is funded and assisted by the Irish Embassy Emigrant Support Programme, the Leicester City Council, St Patrick's Parish, Leicester, Sheffield Hallam University, University College Dublin, Achill Oral Histories, Achill Island, County Mayo, and of course, the Emerald Centre. Thank you.